Remember that December 19th deadline that the Department of Justice needed to release every single file related to the Epstein and Maxwell investigations? We already know that didn't happen, but it's much worse than we thought. There have only been 1% of the documents released. Look at this letter. According to the Attorney General herself, she's the one who wrote this letter. It says right up here, 12,285 documents comprising about 125,575 pages have been released, and she says it right here. There are more than 2 million documents potentially responsive to the act. That means that 1% of the documents that needed to be released have been. So the Attorney General, Pam Bondi herself, as well as the Deputy Attorney General, Todd Blanche, sent this letter to the judge who presided over Ghislaine Maxwell's trial and required the unsealing of the documents relating to that. They're explaining why they haven't gotten there, and it is a little bit confusing as to what they have been doing. Obviously, 2 million documents, which is way more pages, is a lot, but they started explaining what they have been doing now. They're talking about looking for documents that are related to the act, uploading them to a data review platform, then manually reviewing them, looking for victim identifying information, privacy issues, and privileged information, making those redactions, and then they say they go through 2 quality checks before they're published. But the question is, haven't they already been doing that kind of procedure? Now, just below in this paragraph, they say that they've got 400 lawyers across the department, including in New York for the federal government, in Florida for the federal government, as well as at the DOJ headquarters, at the criminal division and the national security division, poring over these documents, as well as 100 document analysts. So they say they've got people on it, constantly spending a good part of their workday going through this information. Notably missing from this, though, is a deadline. They did not say when they're planning to be finished with this. They didn't give even a ballpark as to when they think they could be done. They also let us know that they went back into some of the documents they originally released and redacted more pieces of information there, which, if you remember, a lot of the documents were completely blacked out, so curious what the changes were there. A bipartisan group of senators is also getting involved now. They have reached out to the acting inspector general to ask him to look into the way the Department of Justice handled the release of these files. They also sent this letter to Trump's chief of staff, Susie Wiles, because she said in a Vanity Fair interview that she had read the Epstein files, so they had some questions for her to answer too.
Just a reminder, yesterday was the statutory deadline for the Department of Justice to explain its redactions in the Epstein files. Yeah, those Epstein files. The ones Congress ordered released. The ones the DOJ already missed the deadline on. The ones that were dumped with massive black bars. The ones where 16 files were later deleted, including one with a photo of Trump and Epstein. House Oversight Democrats noticed the timing immediately. They posted, "We're sure it's just a coincidence, but today is the statutory date for the DOJ to explain its redactions." Sure, a coincidence, because when the world is watching Venezuela, the DOJ hasn't explained why millions of Epstein-related documents weren't released, why files vanished after publication, or why the names survivors say they gave to the FBI are still hidden. The DOJ says it's about protecting victims, and no one is arguing against protecting victims. But here's the problem. That excuse does not explain missing files, it does not explain deleted documents, and it does not explain why the people named by survivors remain shielded. So now, Democrat Ro Khanna and Republican Thomas Massie, yes, bipartisan, are bypassing the DOJ entirely. They're asking a federal court to appoint a special master to force the release of the Epstein files. They're also moving to hold Attorney General Pam Bondi in contempt of Congress. That means fines every day until the files are released. Khanna said the public deserves to see the documents that name the rich and powerful men involved, and the survivors deserve to be heard. Meanwhile, the DOJ says it needs at least until January 20th. They've assigned 400 lawyers working around the clock. Funny how urgency appears only after pressure. Funny how deadlines slip until no one's watching. And funny how foreign military operation just happens to dominate the news cycle. And the harder they try to distract, the clearer it becomes the Epstein story is not over. Not even close.
Why have only 1% of the Epstein files been released so far? There are 2 million documents, as we understand it, with the US government, but so far they've only released 12,285. By law, they should have released all of those documents by December the 19th last year. Pam Bondi, on Monday, wrote to a federal judge to explain that substantial work remains to be done. Her department adds that this work has required and will continue to require substantial department resources. The Justice Department have said that they're acting in good faith to release as much material as possible, whilst also going through all the painstaking work of reviewing every single file to make sure that victims' identities are shielded. That is also required by law. It is a huge job, but there are 400 lawyers working on the release of these documents. They're clearly working flat out, but they're not getting there as quickly as, of course, the Epstein survivors want. They want to see what's in those documents. We've only seen 1% of them.
The DOJ just dropped the latest chunk of Epstein files, and this is going to be a little darker than usual. There's some allegations concerning Donald Trump. You know how we always say that coming from the right, every accusation is a confession? And then every once in a while, we realize that we held back on recognizing something as a legitimate accusation and therefore a confession because we just assumed it was too wild, too crazy to really believe. Well, in the latest released files, there are multiple communications from a victim alleging to have been trafficked in 1984 at the age of 13 by her uncle and Epstein, and that Donald Trump was among the men that paid for her. And I'm sorry, I don't want to soften this language, but I feel it's more important that this get out, because that's not all. She also claims that she was pregnant at this time and that Donald Trump was present when her uncle disposed of her newborn in Lake Michigan, which it's hard to know what to do with that information. It sounds like a right-wing conspiracy theory. In fact, it sounds like something that Trump has been accusing Democrats of doing for years, something he calls post-birth abortions, which, as we all know, are not a real thing, because post-birth, that is not an abortion, obviously. And yet, who comes up with something like that? It feels very weird to be on this side of the question of credulity of an accusation of that nature. And to be clear, this is something that has happened to trafficking victims before. We're just not used to knowing the people allegedly involved. There are a couple of reasons why the DOJ may have released this, considering we already know that they have scrubbed Donald Trump's name from these files as much as possible. They literally removed files that contained photos of him or inclusions of his name that they meant to redact and missed. Number one, it was done purposely. They felt that this accusation was either too hard to believe or easier to disprove, easier to cast doubt on than others, hence its inclusion. Or it was, as their previous inclusions of his name, an accident. If you look at
the DOJ has really only released 1% of the total files that they have in their possession, but that's because they say they are still reviewing the files, and that even though they had 30 days technically to release all these files since the law was passed, that they only recently came out or identified an additional 1 million documents that they initially did not review. So that is why there's been a holdup. Lawmakers say this puts them out of compliance with the law. However, there's very little recourse among lawmakers to actually force the DOJ to speed up its review.